This box represents another series of records that we have here. It's one that if you know Bob Wooler at all, you've heard about it. It's called blisterrust maps. And we will probably come back to more detail about the blisterrust maps. But we have blisterrust maps for a large portion of the state. However, we don't have blisterrust maps for 100% of the state. And there are a number of reasons for that. Number one, the entire state was not mapped. There are some portions of the state where pine trees weren't a significant economic value. If there was a pine tree in the backyard, there was an ornamental value, that's one thing, but there wouldn't be whole forests that we expected to do logging and have lumber made from it. And blisterrust maps were made for the purpose of protecting the white pine that was going to have an economic effect on the state economy. A lot of money was invested in the mapping of this to preserve that economic base. So there are areas like Salem, for example, and Plastow, and Portsmouth, and probably Manchester, that don't have a lot of mapping. There are other parts of the state where pine trees aren't fairly common, like way north. The Colebrook area, and I don't know, maybe the Berlin area. I'm not entirely sure, but they may have only mapped pockets of a town. I think that's what they did in Plymouth, is only some portions of the town got mapped because that's where the pine trees were. The rest, they weren't too concerned about. But basically, if you understand what blisterrust is, you know that it's a fungus that alternates hosts between the pine and the ribes family, which includes gooseberry, currants, that family of lowbush. And those lowbush berries grow along edges of fields, stone walls, and so on, where the tree line is still coming in. And so, ergo, if you eliminated the gooseberry and the currant, you stop that alternating host cycle and preserve the pines. And so, knowing that the gooseberry and the currant grow along the stone walls, what do? You spend your time mapping stone walls, wire fences at edges of fields, and so on. Old cellar holes where the gooseberry might be coming in, where that's sort of prime habitat. So if you have pine trees over here and you begin to see symptoms of the white pine blisterrust, the dripping white streaks of sap coming down the side, you know there's ribes somewhere in the area that is the alternate host that you need to do some eradication. And so what you can do then is you can pull out the map of that block and say to a crew of 2 or 3 or 5 men or whatever, eliminate the ribes in this block because we've got something affecting the pine trees in that area. Mm-hmm. And they can say, all right, Joe, you go up this wall and down here. I'm going to have Fred do this wall and this wall. We'll meet you down here because somebody else will do these walls in here, and know that we've gotten everything. And they'll walk up and down these walls and eradicate one way or another any ribes that they come across.
Now these maps that you just took out randomly out of this, these are Canterbury, it appears.
Yes.
And the date on these is 1952. Although I'm guessing that they date back beyond that. This is like a most recent iteration.
Correct. That's how I would take it, because the actual mapping program began. There were some experiments done in the late teens, mm-hmm. when they first began to realize that blister rust had been imported into the state from foreign invasive species.
Yeah, we have some of the maps, I think, that do date back to the 1920s. I don't know if I've seen any much
20s is
beyond that.
when they
Yeah.
really started
Yeah.
going in some depth and some detail. And then, of course, as soon as the Depression hit and they had CCC money, they hired a lot of men and taught them how to use a compass and do pacing work and so on to do very crude mapping. And that's what this is very crude mapping. But it's very crude mapping at a very detailed level. So what they did was they tried to control the crude measurement by using USGS sheets and using the roads as the control measures. So what they would do is measure, they would actually map out all of the stone walls between a certain set of roads and use the roads as the control measures from the USGS map. So that's how they sort of try to sort of fudge. Rubber sheet is the term that I hear Bob talk about. They would essentially be a rubber sheeting their pacing and so on to fit between these mapped roads from the USGS maps and make the walls fit. So the details are not going to fit perfectly, but they're going to show you a large amount of detail. They show you the walls, they show you the wire fences, the cellar holes, even changes in the types of forest that they're walking through, whether it's hardwood, softwood, pine, maples, hemlock, and so on. So there's all kinds of detailed natural information.
So these are the primary documents that people actually created as they walked those
That is correct.
sections. I've met 2 or 3 of people who actually did this. One was Bob Woodward,
Correct.
and he described the actual method of doing it, where they would walk and then mark on that map where the wall began, take a compass bearing, and then continue walking all the way around the perimeter of the block. Then start pacing out the walls and counting their paces and marking the little chain of stone wall. It's remarkable. And it's also remarkable how accurate they turn out to be.
Yes, and I have in the handouts for each of you over here, I think Bob Woodard's account, written account, that he left behind. He's now deceased. But Walter Breckenridge in Newport also wrote about his experience mapping, and he left that behind, and that was published by the Land Surveyors Association. I've got a copy of that. So you can read a few of these accounts of the individuals who actually did the surveying and mapping during the 30s, particularly, what they did and how they did it and what it meant to them. So you're right. It really ties you down while you're out stumbling over these same stone walls to know that you're a part of a chain of custodians that are taking care of these walls and using them for references. But anyway, this is another one of the many kinds of collections that we've got.